Welcome to the morning show, everybody. I'm so happy to have you with us. My name is Mary Jacobsen. I'm going to be your host this morning. We are broadcasting live on Channel 9, but if you prefer, you can also watch us streaming live on Port Media's YouTube channel. Just go to www.ncmhub.org and click on the YouTube icon. I am so happy this morning to welcome historian and teacher Susan Harvey here to talk about Black Lives Matter protests and within the context of Great Awakening, as well as Reconstruction in U.S. history, and also her thoughts about reparations. Later in the show, we'll be talking about the new Sound and Light show that's just launched at Castle Hill Illuminated, with Robin Donovan-Bocchiaro, who's cultural site administrator for Castle Hill, and lighting designer Chris Bocchiaro. But now let me welcome Susan Harvey to the show. Susan was on the show just about a year ago, I think, Susan, it was, to talk about her fascinating research on the triangle trade and how Newburyport's economy was entangled with and dependent upon slavery. I'm delighted to welcome her back today to talk about racial history and what's going on in the country today. So Susan, welcome back, and thank you so much. I've been just longing to talk to you about some of these topics. So welcome. Thank you, Susan. Good to see you.
Well, thank you for having me again, Mary. I look forward to speaking to you again.
Wonderful. Well, let's dig in. These are such turbulent times, and you know, I think we're all feeling that so much has happened so quickly that it's often hard to see the underlying patterns and the context. But one of the things I've learned from you and other historians that I've been privileged to interview on the show is that you can't understand what's going on in the present if you don't know the currents of history that have shaped it. And in U.S. history, those currents are always going to involve race. So recently, I came across an article by CNN commentator Van Jones, who was framing some of the changes launched by the Black Lives Matter protests as a great awakening. And thanks to you, I recognize that phrase as one that has a particular history. And I knew I wanted to talk to you about that comparison. Van Jones had a long list of things that have happened within the last few months. The NFL changing its tune on Colin Kaepernick. Let's see, a supermajority of Americans actually agreeing that Black people are treated differently by law enforcement than white people. The flag of the state of Mississippi relinquishing its Confederate flag as part of it. The George Floyd's law enforcement murderer and accomplices actually being charged with crimes in Minneapolis. And the overarching shift, as Van Jones put it, that many more Americans are now actually accepting that anti-Black racism is a real and present danger. The idea, he said, that racism is over, that idea now itself is over. So Susan, I was hoping that you could remind us of the context of prior Great Awakenings in U.S. racial history and tell us if, in your opinion, what we're seeing now is another Great Awakening or something else.
Well, Mary, I think it probably is a Great Awakening. There were two in our past history. The first one was in the 1700s, and it was a religious Great Awakening. That's the first one. The second one was in the 19th century. And this is the one that involved the reform movements of abolition and temperance and women's rights. And that is what I think stoked things. And that's probably what Van Jones was talking about, is that awakening that things are not right in our society and we're going to make some reforms to change those things. Of course, that's when the abolition movement really got moving. Now, whether it was sending Africans back to Africa, that was certainly one.
That was one of the proposals, and I think one that actually Abraham Lincoln at one point advocated.
He absolutely did.
Yeah,
he absolutely did. And I think it's been very interesting to follow the conversations about the emancipation statue of him that we have a copy here in Boston because the sculptor was, Thomas Ball, was from Boston. So the original is in Washington, and the context that tells you something about. The Great Awakening at that point definitely pushed towards a civil war. And You're absolutely right. We cannot talk about American history without talking about Black history. You cannot do it. It is enshrined in our Constitution, regrettably. So we are seeing another awakening. It didn't happen with the first YouTube Black murder. Mm-hmm. It's taken a little while to do it, but it's been within 7 years. And I think one of the things that has made George Floyd's murder different is that we have this perfect storm. We have his horrific murder, because that's what it was. And we also have rhetoric that is coming from the highest places in our country. And as though it is perfectly normal to say some of these horrific things. And we have a pandemic. And as you and I are doing a Zoom radio program, because I can't come in there, right? We're all on our screens all the time. When George Floyd was murdered, we couldn't look away.
It's true.
Nothing else to go to.
Yeah.
And so you saw that video over and over again. Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, those poor individuals that were murdered, we saw it once, moved on to the next thing. That's not what's happening now. We're all locked into our screens, and it has made that much of a difference.
And for George Floyd, there was no alternate narrative because we saw it. It was recorded. It was a video, and we didn't just see it once. They replayed it over and over again.
That's what I mean. So yes, I mean, and it was, and so that more people are filming what is happening in interactions with the police. Now, I will say this, that the vigils that we've had here in Littleton, on our Littleton Common, have been completely supported by the police. Mm-hmm. And we have worked in concert with them to make sure that they are peaceful gatherings. And they're very, very powerful. We have another one. I'm going to do a little plug here on the 8th of August, and there will be speakers and music. And so come, please.
Excellent. Good to know.
Yeah. All of the towns are doing this. Mm-hmm. And I think it is so very interesting. One of the podcasts that we're listening to in the PD that we're doing this summer for teachers in Littleton to deal with racism and anti-racism in the classroom is white people. Why now? Well, I think it's that perfect storm. I really do. And I think enough has happened that people are going, oh my gosh. And we have to be allies here. It's white people have to talk to white people about this. Black people know.
Yeah, they've always know. They've had to know. But I think that that certainly that video was a tipping point. But I think others. I mean, I think what many people, the white people, including myself, felt like was this police officer thought he could get away with this. It was the audacity of the crime. Yes. And the feeling I had was, this is America. This is a major Midwestern city, and this police officer clearly, thought that he could do this. He knew he was being filmed, and the fact that this murder could take place in front of our eyes was it was tantamount to being witnessed at a lynching. And for those of us who thought we couldn't have modern lynchings quite as flagrantly, quite as brutally, it kind of, I think, forced an awareness of systemic racism on the part of white people. And it's not accidental then that so many of those books like White Supremacy and Me, that's right. All of those have now, I'm happy about this, and I'm sure the authors are too, in the bookstores, they've become phenomenal runaway bestsellers. That's right. So, and it's high time that white people take on the responsibility for educating ourselves about these issues and this history.
You did mention one word there, and that's systemic. Mm-hmm. Racism, anti-Black racism isn't an event. It is systemic. It has always been here. And our federal government, our local governments have encouraged this and supported it. And most of us have just stood by and allowed it to happen. Because we benefited, whether we understood we were benefiting or not, we benefited from this. And that's the issue here. I saw a great quote the other day that when you have had privilege, equality begins to feel like oppression.
Yes, that's very well put. That's right.
It's
That's
not
right.
mine. I'm not going to take credit, but I don't know who said it. It
right.
is just, and that idea that you are now losing something because someone else is gaining.
Right.
Well, it's nonsense.
Right. Well, it is, but you know, it reminds me of some of the literature on positive psychology that I used to study, demonstrated that people hate losing something more than they enjoy getting something new. Yeah. And so that's part of the pushback as well, I think. Absolutely. So, yeah, absolutely. That's part of what we're up against. And when it becomes important, I think, to change that perception, that we also benefit when there's equality, because it makes us a better world. And it feels better to live in a better world and to feel a sense of pride in one's fairness. So I think we could punch up that understanding, perhaps.
I'd love to see that. I would love to see that. That makes me think of the recent comment by Congressman Tom Cotton, and he said that slavery was a necessary evil. Evil, absolutely. Necessary, absolutely not.
Yeah, that was kind of a jaw-dropping, but it brought the 1619 Project back in the news, and I did want to, also when I read what Tom Cotton, I said, I have to talk to Susan about this, is he said, just to remind people who might not have seen it, he said, now infamously, that the founders had seen slavery as a necessary evil, and they had laid the groundwork for its eventual certain extinction. I mean, he also has introduced legislation to deny federal funding to K through 12 public school curricula that employ the 1619 Project, because I believe, I can't remember the exact words he used, but the idea is that it gives a mistaken or ill-founded presentation that America's founding was rife with racism and injustice. So tell us, Susan, about your view of the necessary evil and how the founders viewed it, and did they plant the seeds for its eventual extinction?
They did not plant the seeds for its eventual extinction. And there was some conversation in the 1780s that it might very well die out, because what you have in the northern states at this point, we already have a division, is that they are doing gradual manumission, gradual abolition. And it was really a matter of, we don't need to have the free labor that the South needs. So it began to be, well, why do we have this? Well, of course, the North benefited from Southern slavery, cotton mills, all of the produce, everything that was done in the South, all of it came north as well. But if you don't see it, it's okay, right? So there was no, I mean, at the time of the Civil War, there were 4 million people enslaved. That is way more than at the founding of the country with the Constitution.
Yeah, it's a vast number, and I think when I first read that number, I had no idea how many slaves there were. And
they were worth more than everything put together in this country. All the banks, all the manufacturing, everything. They were worth more. Gradual, getting rid of slavery, nonsense.
Yeah. And in fact, part of the driver of the Civil War, and you correct me on this if I'm wrong, was that the Confederate States wanted to champion the expansion of slavery into the West.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that was, the fact that Abraham Lincoln said, it's okay to have it right where it is, but I don't want it expanded. Well, why are we expanding it? Because we want to have, every single secession declaration is about keeping human beings enslaved.
Yeah.
That's why they seceded. And they wanted to expand that to make more profits. It is about the pocketbook here.
Yes.
Right? So that idea that you are then better than these people that you don't even call people.
So what was necessary was economic expansion and profit.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, well, I wanted to talk to you about the failed effort in this country of Reconstruction post-Civil War. I know you teach courses on this
Yes.
in the past, and I think you have one coming up, Susan.
Yes.
And so you've talked before about Reconstruction as an unfinished and struggle and an ongoing struggle in the U.S. And I was hoping you could understand what was never finished, never fixed, never rectified or repaired, why we got interminably stuck in this country, and how this lack of completion continues to impact us today.
Okay, big topic. Lots of historians, much smarter and cleverer than I, have written many books on this. Eric Foner, in particular, I would say look for books on Reconstruction by him.
David, Susan, you are a champion explainer. And a lot of us will never get to those books, but I know you're good at explaining things, which what makes you an excellent teacher.
Well, thank you. Reconstruction was flawed because we end up having somebody who forgave everyone in the South, Andrew Johnson, and allowed everyone back in prior to making the fundamental systematic changes that needed to happen. But we have to also remember that no damage was done to northern states. The South was destroyed. How do you fix that without labor? So we have this very short period of time, about 12 years, where, yes, African-American men end up with the vote. We have them in from mayor up into the Congress. This is fabulous, and people are being allowed to vote. But it falls apart in 1877, and the troops, the federal troops, are moved out of the South, and we just go backwards. We do not have slavery anymore per se, but we have convict labor leasing, we have Jim Crow laws, we have every possible obstruction to voting. We still see this.
We do indeed, yeah.
Every state gets to say how it registers people to vote and how they vote. And this, I was reminded of this because I was reading a book that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, but in the 2004 election, a friend of mine and I got in our cars after work. We drove to Cleveland. We worked the polls. And here we are in Cleveland, which has a high percentage of Black individuals who are taking their lunchtime to vote. It's a half an hour. You get docked if you don't get back, right? And there's one place to vote. Out in the white suburbs, wide open.
It's a common story.
That is systemic racism.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So when we don't fix the voting, when we end up, and when I said something about convict labor leasing, that technically ended in the 1950s, where you could, just hire, anybody who was in a, you could pick up for vagrancy, you could pick up for anything, throw them into jail, and somebody could hire them to work for them. It is phenomenal. Slavery by Another Name, that's the book.
Yeah.
And the film. But it is, what's happening today? Who's in our prisons today? Overwhelmingly Black men. And if you think things aren't being made in prison, well, we always think license plates, right?
Right.
Victoria's Secret. Think about that.
I did not know that.
Yes.
Oh my.
Yes. Think about this for a minute. So many products are made. We have a for-profit prison system.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. Which is rife for abuse.
We don't see that. If you are white, you don't see that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is very, very complex. This is why we still have anti-Black racism. It is systemic. It's who can get a loan, who can't get a loan, who's targeted for those subprime mortgages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I also wanted to ask you, because reparations are a very kind of current topic. There's been more of an opening recently in certain places and with certain people than there ever has been. But one of the things that when I interviewed before and what you were just talking about is that our economy, North and South, everywhere was founded upon the free labor of enslaved Africans and now incarcerated Black Americans, and also not to leave out indigenous people were also enslaved.
Yes.
And so in your view, we're since in many ways we're still benefiting from the legacy of that exploitation that built plantations in the South and much commerce in the North.
Yes.
What are your thoughts about some kind of reparations?
This is hard. I remember actually doing some research and a paper on this when I was doing my master's, and just handing over a sum of money to every person of color in this country isn't going to actually work. Mm-hmm. And you know, when the people in government say, "Well, I wasn't alive for this."
Yes, and that's always what people say.
Yes, I didn't do this. I didn't enslave anyone. Yes, well, you know what? Your ancestors did, mm-hmm. and you have profited as a result because of inheritance, because of other status. So you have still profited. But, you know, I think about the reparations that were made to the Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II, and they got some sum of money finally of like $20,000. Well, that does not pay for the lost business, the lost home, the lost years, the lives.
And the psychological trauma.
Oh my heavens, how do you fix that? So in terms of reparations, I know some universities are now offering scholarships to people that they can identify may have been somehow connected. So African Americans. But the problem here is that every person of color, whether you are from Jamaica, whether you are from South America, whether you are from Africa, last week, every person of color in this country feels the effects of racism. So that's a really difficult thing to do. What the reparations should be is to fix the housing, to fix the voting, to fix the opportunities for businesses, and stop imprisoning our young Black men. I mean, it's systemic. This is the thing, is that it isn't just one thing. It can't just be money. It can't just be those college scholarships for the few people that you can identify. It has to be systemic, and it has to come from the top.
Yeah, in some, a vast systemic injustice has to be fixed by a vast systemic movement toward justice and equality for all. Correct. Yeah, that's a really interesting framework that you put on that. I haven't heard people talk about it in quite those terms, Susan. Thank you for that. That's really helpful. Well, I know that there is there were a couple of books, I think, that you mentioned to me ahead of time that you're very engaged by, and I want to learn more about what has been engaging for you about them. I think one of them was The Color of Law.
The Color of Law.
There it is.
Okay, Richard Rothstein, and this is 2017. It is written in such a clear manner. He works for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and he's got a lot of other titles as well. But systemically, how we have prevented Blacks and people of color in this country from gaining access to the things that we benefit from. Mm. They don't have mortgages. I mean, when we think about FDR and we think about the New Deal, I can remember teaching the New Deal about how awesome this was. Yeah, well, guess what? It didn't cover agriculture. It didn't cover household service. And that's where most African Americans were employed. They didn't get any benefits from it. The federal housing agencies wouldn't give loans. You were not permitted to live in white suburbs. Mm-hmm. And nobody stood up and said, why not? So when you don't have the people standing up on our common or wherever and saying, why aren't these people being allowed to be here? And the white flight from the cities, all of this, it's not just redlining.
Right.
So
Yeah.
we all know about that. It's illegal. It still happens.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think more of us now know about redlining because people have been talking about that as an easy to understand example of systemic racism. But you're filling in some of the history about the New Deal that I did not know, and I think that that's really important for people to fill in. And apparently, that's what The Color of Law does.
Yes.
Well, there's another book, I think.
Well, and this is a pair of them, and this doesn't have a glorious cover because I lost it. It's Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. Ibram X. Kendi, marvelous. However, it's over 500 pages. It's so well researched and so scholarly, and I'm eating it up. But for those of you who don't have that time, this is the YA version, okay?
All right, good to know.
Okay, it's stamped. Racism, Anti-Racism, and You.
Okay.
This is quite remarkable. And it is co-written by Jason Reynolds, who has won awards for his YA novels and poetry. It is so engaging that I have asked our district to get me a class set for my new class.
Oh, excellent.
Yes.
Excellent.
So it's very, very clear. It's very clear about how it has been from 1619, thank you very much, and before.
Yeah.
That and I will be teaching 1619. I won't take any money from Mr. Cotton, but I will be teaching.
Well, he's only proposed the legislation. Hopefully it won't pass.
Right.
So, Susan, there was one more thing I wanted to ask you about. Well, there's many more, but one more we probably have time for today. You'll just have to keep coming back as the news changes. But you talked about the way that history itself changes over time, reflecting that there are some things that we're willing to remember and some things that we're unwilling to remember. And so recently, we've all been reading about the movement to topple statues of Confederate leaders from Robert E. Lee to Jefferson Davis. And I've noticed the way that these Confederate leaders are being talked about differently now than I ever remember them being talked about now. Of course, I went to school in Virginia, so that may skew how I remember them being talked about.
The heart of the Confederacy, right?
That's right, and home of the Custis Lee Mansion and the capital of the Confederacy. But Robert E. Lee, for example, was talked about a brilliant tactician. People talked about the lost cause, and they would talk about heroes of the Confederacy. And now people are describing them as losers and traitors to the United States government. So I went to high school in Fairfax, Virginia, and believe me, there's been one dramatic change there recently that's made the news. They changed the name of Robert E. Lee High School. It's extraordinary and wonderful. It's now John Lewis High School.
Yes.
Yes. So I wanted to ask you, do you think that American history is changing as we speak? Now, that's a funny thing to say. You think of history as history. It happened in the past. But as you've pointed out, it's not that simple. So do you think that we are currently willing to remember things that we weren't willing to remember, with Robert E. Lee and Jefferson Davis being traitors to the United States as an example of that?
Well, they were. And anybody who seceded and was fighting against the Union technically were traitors. So the fact that when they came back into the Union after the war, they were welcomed with open arms without anything whatsoever, that sets the stage for your lost cause. That sets the stage for they were heroes. I mean, I grew up in Ohio with a grandmother who was, I realized, not at the time, she died when I was 16, that she was terribly racist. She used to weep at the Kentucky Derby song, right? And she had a little jockey boy in her front yard in Michigan, right? And she claimed that we were related to Robert E. Lee. Well, I thought that was kind of cool when I was young because he was seen as this brilliant tactician, that he was seen as, well, yes, I would, you know, he said to Lincoln, well, I can't really do, you know, lead the Union Army because if Virginia's leaving, I have to leave with Virginia. Well, come on. These romantic stories, but that's what I grew up with, right? You grew up with the same kind of thing. Yeah. There's no profit in lying to students. They need to know why the things are happening today. Yeah. And in terms of all of those statues that went up, this is one thing Lee did say, don't put a statue up about me. I don't want this, right? So those statues came up in the 1920s by the Daughters of the Confederacy. They were trying to revive this lost cause. It's in that same era that Gone with the Wind is written, then KKK comes back, and we are pushing immigrants out and creating a quota system. We only want Northern white people here. You have to teach that to understand why we are standing on the common. Yeah, absolutely. That river of history that provides the context and the patterns that help you to understand, oh, this is a new iteration of that. Because you can fight it better, I think, if you know what you're up against and it's historically grounded. Got to have your facts. I said that was going to be my last question, but I realized there's just one more that I'm curious to find out about, and that is, Susan, are you feeling hopeful these days? You know, I am. The first vigil that we had on the Common, I received an email from a student I had had, and she graduated in 2015. Hadn't heard from her since then. She said, Mama Harv, I remember how passionate you were in class. What do I need to do to pull this together to have a demonstration about George Floyd's death? So I gave her some suggestions. Of course I attended. It was the first thing I'd done, and really the only thing I've done, in a crowd with a mask. Everybody had to have a mask, right? But I was so proud of all of the young people who came and stood up and made really good signs and and they have continued. They go to a next town, they do another one here. They are our future, and they are paying attention, and they don't want to be lied to. So yes, I am hopeful. And if anybody has the New York Times, a wonderful essay, an op-ed from John Lewis that the New York Times promised to put in the day he was buried. It was written just before. He is hopeful. And I'll tell you, if John Lewis is hopeful, honey, I'm hopeful. he has the cred, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Good trouble, good trouble. Absolutely. Yeah. Susan, I can't thank you enough. What a joy to talk to you. You are a wonderful teacher, and you do have a gift for just explaining things. So thank you very much for that. Mary, it's a great pleasure to talk to you every time. Thank you so much. We'll do it again. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It's an honor. So anyway, thanks so much. Be well. You too, absolutely. Thank you. Well, we're going to shift gears now and welcome Robin Donovan-Bocchiaro and Chris Bocchiaro, who are going to talk to us about the Sound and Light show, Castle Hill Illuminated. And let's see, Lily, if we can get Robin and Chris on screen at this point. So there they are. Hi, Robin. Hi, Chris. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Mary.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, let me introduce you. Chris is an Emerson College grad and a lighting designer for theater, opera, dance, and public art. And you can find his work throughout the greater Boston area. Recently at the Actors Shakespeare Project, the Lyric Stage Company, Boston Opera Collaborative, Apollinaire Theater, Hub Theater Company, Theater on Fire, Old South Church, the Company Theater, Gloucester Stage, Emerson Stage, and Imaginary Beasts. which I'm going to find out about in a minute. So in other words, you've been working hard and everywhere in the Boston area, Chris. So Robin is the cultural site administrator for Castle Hill on the Crane Estate, and she's in charge of visitor experience on the Hill, including the tour program. Her passion is teaching history to people of all ages and keeping and finding stories to be retold and remembered for the next generation. Thank you both so much for coming to visit the morning show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, we're glad you had us.
Well, okay, Chris, I promised to find out about Imaginary Beast. I saw that in your bio, so I need to find out what is Imaginary Beast. And in addition to that, it mentioned Hairy Tales and that you won an award for best lighting in 2013 from the Independent Reviewers of New England. So explain.
Sure. Imaginary Beast is a movement theater company of which I've been a part for, almost 7 years now or so, maybe even more than that. It's getting away from me, but they're actually based in Salem. The director is a gentleman named Matthew Woods, and it's probably one of the most unique theatrical experiences that I've ever been a part of. It's very fringe theater, so it's avant-garde. It's generally small audiences, small venues, but because of those small venues, it's so incredibly intimate. You're right up in front of performers who are telling a story not only verbally, but in a devised way through movement and through imagery. And so that's been pretty critical to my kind of development as a designer, I guess. The show that you mentioned was actually based on radio plays by Angela Carter.
The science fiction. Yeah, okay.
Exactly. So they were devised into movement theater pieces. And that particular piece, Hairy Tales, was somewhat unique for me in that we really kind of pulled from the past a lot. We wanted to evoke a very kind of ancient feel, or maybe not that ancient, but we pulled back to the kind of mid-1800s to this idea of magic lantern shows, which are basically these very old-timey projections. So long before video projectors, they had these devices that you could put a candle in that would project it in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we found one on eBay and actually sort of retrofitted it and created these beautiful slides that actually became a part of the lighting in that production. So sort of another step backwards in trying to find things from our history that we can incorporate even into modern theatrical lighting and production.
Well, thank you for that explanation. I was just so intrigued by the title. It sounds really intriguing. I'm sorry it's over.
Hopefully there'll be live theater again.
Okay, well, yeah. Oh, gosh, one of these days. Well, speaking of what can be open and what's not open, Robin, I was hoping that you could tell us what's happening at the much-beloved Castle Hill these days on the Crane Estate. I'm sure people are wondering, what's closed, what's open, what's happening at Castle Hill?
Yeah, and interestingly, I just barely got this question on Facebook from a specialized group on Mansions of the Gilded Age just this morning. So I'm answering a lot. So the grounds at Castle Hill are opened. We do require timed ticketing for that because we're limiting the number of cars that can park in our parking lot. It's not a very big parking lot to begin with. But in addition to allowing people to explore the grounds in 3-hour chunks, we are also doing landscape tours. We've got our golf cart tour that we're currently running. And we also have a walking tour of the grounds that we're running as well. And all of those can be pre-booked online to reduce touch points. And then in addition to that, of course, we have our Castle Hill Illuminated project, which we're going to be describing in much, much more detail.
Yes, you are, if I have anything to do with it, because I went last week. I think it was actually the first night last Friday, and it is spectacular. So tell us about the Sound and Light show. It's officially called Castle Hill Illuminated. First of all, how did you get the idea for a Sound and Light show?
So it's not a new form. The concept, they're originally called sonnet lumières. They started doing them in France in, I want to say, the 1950s or so, although I'm sure some version of them have been done long before then. But it's basically the idea of illuminating a historic site, generally with narration, with music, and using that to tell the story of the site. So the sonnet lumière form is very much tied to this idea of historical storytelling in a site-specific way. So, I was sort of brainstorming with Robin a little bit, who of course is, cultural site administrator at Castle Hill, and she's, kind of bemoaning, what are we going to do? We can't live in the house. How do you tell the story of the place when the gates are locked, when no one can go inside? And so the idea kind of hit upon us that, hey, we can tell the story in a different way, in a way that fits with the necessities of social distancing, by keeping people outside, but by having the stories from inside the house, the historical stories, kind of seep through the walls and tell themselves that way. So we took this idea of a classic sonnet lumière, and we put a few spins on it. We kind of merged that idea with what's known as promenade theater, which is the kind of idea of theater where the audience moves around from site to site, from scene to scene. And that's been kind of getting more popular in the last couple of years. There's been a number of productions in Boston that have done that. So we said, well, sonnet lumières are cool, but we don't necessarily want everybody just sitting in one spot the whole time anyway. They're going to get bored. There's only so many tricks you can pull out. Let's keep people moving. Let's keep people enjoying the air. Let's show as much of the property as we can. So we kind of merged these ideas together and created something that is a 30-minute long experience, and it features lighting up of the facades in a dynamic and interesting way. It reveals a number of silhouettes which were created that live in the windows. And these are actually based on historical images, based on people who lived in the house or who worked to contribute in the creation of the house and the landscape. That was based on a piece that's actually in the trustees' collection, which is called...
Crane Family at Tea by Evelyn von Maydell is a paper-cut silhouette of the Crane family. So when the house finally can open again and we can have visitors on the second floor, it is something that we have in our collection. So
it's kind of this beautiful paper cut. It's very, very intricate. You can see all the details.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'm sure people who have been on the wonderful house tour, they also know exactly. It is astonishingly detailed, astonishingly detailed. So anyway, yes, and then the silhouettes are in the windows, and the lighting moves from one to the other to tell the story. So
exactly. So we pulled inspiration from that. We brought in music, we brought in a sort of a storyline, and so I think it's a fun experience in that it brings a lot of different elements together. It keeps people moving and kind of tells the story of the house, while also just giving people a really nice night to really experience the property in a way that most people probably haven't before, out under the stars.
Absolutely. I know I hadn't before. I mean, it's a majestic house, the Great House. It's massive in scale. And that was actually one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because there's the massive Great House, and then there's also the formal garden, which is lit up. So how did you go about, I was trying to imagine the endeavor of trying to design something on that scale. What were some of the special challenges of having something, Chris, that big, that monumental, and because people are moving around, I mean, that's more space that you have to fill with lighting. So what were the special challenges of the scale of Castle Hill?
Probably the main challenge was time. So we were formally given the green light to go ahead with the project about 2.5 weeks before it opened.
That is not a lot of time. Having been there, I can appreciate that sounds like 24/7.
It was something, we brainstormed for years, but finally we got the go-ahead to do it.
Oh.
Hey, gosh, here we go. So, but luckily, I had faith in the theatrical practitioners that that we brought in to collaborate with us. So we immediately hired a sound designer, we hired a scenic designer, we hired a number of electricians to come to run probably over about 2,000 feet of wire throughout the inside of the house for everything. So, time was definitely probably the main challenge to get it all. And of course, the elements, everything that is outdoors needs to be kind of outdoor rated and weatherproof, because we're leaving it out there for 2 months. So, we weren't able to use any kind of traditional theatrical equipment. It's also specialized architectural equipment that's designed for that. So a lot less, plugging things in and a lot more splicing them up in junction boxes and all that. So, but I think the scale is important too, because we wanted to do justice to the massiveness of the place, and we wanted to, we wanted people to be able to move around. So we had a number of ideas. We talked about doing things in the LA as well. Ultimately, we had to sort of settle on these 4 distinct viewing locations and visuals, but there's just so much to play with, both architecturally and in the landscape.
Well, I want to find out if you had particularly favorite special effects that you're especially fond of. I did. There is what I'm calling in the formal garden, I'm calling it the Firefly Effect, where there are these twinkling lights that will go up and down the parallel rows of plantings, and it's just enchanting. It's like enchanting is the right word for it. So I'm wondering if both of you had favorite effects within the show.
I was actually going to say something similar to that, because it was very much inspired by our work in the garden. We'd come up with the idea of, hey, there's all these flowers here, let's put lights within the flower beds and make that come to life. And then during the course of actually installing everything, we spent so much time in the garden. And for people who want to experience it in the daytime, it's absolutely phenomenal. And I'm not a huge garden person. I don't know the names of 99% of the things growing there. But it's just incredible, the profusions of flowers, and the bees like live there in little cities of bumblebees, and the hummingbirds come, and the birds and the frogs, and everybody's just alive. So that kind of idea of that the flowers have this life-giving kind of inspires a lot of those effects within the garden.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Robin?
Interestingly, it's still in the flower bed, but it's when the lights go all the way up in the flower bed.
Oh, yes.
Because for the most part, you can't really see the flowers that late at night.
Yeah.
The fireflies are really cool, but you can't really see what they're in.
Yeah.
But the minute those garden lights go all the way up to full, you start to see the colors of the different plants, which I really, really enjoy.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. It absolutely is. Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about the sound part and how you managed to tell a story about the cranes. You've chosen 1929, and the cranes are getting ready for a party, of course. They love to party. So tell us a little bit about how you chose 1929 and what it is that people will learn about the Crane family and how they entertained at the Great House.
So we chose 1929 partially because that's the year that our tour program is set in anyway, and it's the perfect year to really go with because it's before the Wall Street crash. The crash doesn't happen until the end of the year. It's also before Mr. Crane passes away. He dies in 1931, so we still have all the family members. The Great House has finally been completed. It was finished towards the end of the year in 1928, so it's right in that niche. It's the perfect moment. It's also interesting because we do talk about the Illyria quite a bit in the script. And part of that is because Cornelius Crane just isn't home. He is out in the middle of the Pacific, exploring the Pacific, the South Pacific Islands, having a grand old time. And we actually could use primary sources from that in the show. So we have Sidney Shercliffe in the show reading an excerpt of his book, Jungle Islands, because it works. And it's such an interesting part of the Crane family story. So, you know, you enter the show, you start with, we've got 2 guests that lead you through the entire production that are with you the entire show. They're in every scene. And they give you a little bit of background as they're going, but we also have narrators woven in for the things that those 2 guests just wouldn't know. So you get the introduction to all the different household staff and all of that, and what goes into preparing a party, what the party itself is like. And, you know, you get introduced to all these other people that were in the Crane social circle. And then we take you out to the middle of the Pacific in the middle of the show, so you know what Fortuitous is up to.
Right.
Although, interestingly, on the back terrace of the house, we do talk a lot about architecture and the design and David Adler, because we can't miss an educational opportunity.
Right.
But one of my favorite things is there's this letter from David Adler to Paul Manship, the artist who created the Griffins. And we actually have David Adler, or voice David Adler, reading that letter with the sound of typing in the background. And that's a real letter that he actually wrote. So it's really cool to get those voices in the show as well. So.
Absolutely. And, you know, you do a great job creating the sense of the feel of preparing for the party. And then, you know, you get the sense that there's a kind of roaring 20s jazz playing. And I have to tell you, I just wanted the French doors to open and for me to be able to go in and join them. Yeah. So you did a good job. It really creates the atmosphere of the jazz age. Is really fun. So, and I learned, not for nothing, because you talk about Mrs. Crane, you know, and her, you know, what she was planning to have for dinner. And I discovered that Mrs. Crane and I shared a love of Jell-O. So who knew?
Well, popular dessert in the 20s.
What do you think the Cranes would have thought of the Sound and Light show?
I think they would have enjoyed it. I think, you know, it's hard to tell. We know the Cranes were at Castle Hill in the midst of the influenza epidemic in 2018, specifically when it hit Ipswich, which, you know, gives you at least a little bit of an idea. They knew what a pandemic was. They knew how to handle these things. That being said, their house wasn't open to the public in quite the same way. Though in 1919, they did open the gardens for the public to come and walk through. So I think it's something that they would have enjoyed because it would have given them an opportunity to entertain, even with social distancing and, you know, everyone wearing masks. You know, this was a reality of their world too. It's a little bit different this time around, but not much.
Well, and Mr. Crane loved technology, so he probably would have been totally in line with the modern technology, the sound and the light.
He would have been over the moon with the technology.
Well, it's time now to let people know when the show is happening, how long will it be showing, and how can they get more information or tickets?
So the show will be running until September 12th. We're offering it 4 nights a week. It's Wednesday through Saturday. And the show runs every 15 minutes. It is automated, so we do like people to show up on time.
Yeah.
We can't stop the show for you. But if you want any more information or any of that, you can go to www.thetrustees.org/things-to-do. And Castle Hill Illuminated, being one of our bigger projects, should pop right up. But if it doesn't, you can always search for Castle Hill and then it will pop up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think people are just hungry for things to do because there's so many things we can't do. And so it is pretty spectacular and well done. I didn't realize that you had 2.5 weeks to do it. So extra well done. And thanks for doing it. It really is fun. So anyway, thank you so much, Robin and Chris. It's wonderful to have you on the show. And I really appreciate appreciate your taking the time to be here and explain more about the magnificent Castle Hill Illuminated. Thanks very much. Take care now.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you'll join us next Thursday on the morning show. Next week, I'm pleased to welcome clinical social worker Lisa Dubé, who will be here bringing us clarity and understanding and, most important, evidence-based knowledge about transgender identities and the diversity of transgender people. So please join us for that. I'm delighted to be able to welcome David Yang, who's the artistic director of the Newburyport Chamber Music Festival, who will confirm indeed that the festival is emphatically not canceled, but will offer a special lineup of 2020 events, including a chamber music version of Christmas caroling coming to your very own neighborhood, as well as other events. So please join us next Thursday at 9 a.m. for the morning show. If you missed part of today's show, it'll be available for viewing on Port Media's YouTube channel playlist for the morning show. Just go to www.ncmhub.org and click on the YouTube icon. Each show will also air on WJOP FM 96.3 Friday at 8 a.m. and the following Tuesday at 4 and Wednesday at 3, and will also be available as a podcast on the SoundCloud. Again, go to www.ncmhub.org and click on the cloud icon and scroll down. Thanks for watching, everybody. It's always an honor to have you with me. Hope you'll join us next week. Take care. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Bye now.